Over the years, Kurt has led and informed the industry with his sharp insights on the future of radio. And it's become customary for him to give his State of the Industry address here at Rain Summit West. Founder and publisher of Rain News, a publication he started in the late 90s, Kurt continues to examine the space and provide his sharp insights in his blog on Rain News and his annual industry speeches. When it comes to online audio, he is the pioneer and thought leader in the space. Ladies and gentlemen, Kurt Hanson.
I wrote that intro. Not really. Okay, so let's see, is the self-timer working? Yes. For those of you who are new, thanks for coming. A little 30 seconds of background is we've been writing Rain, the newsletter, since fall of 1999. Have turned it into a conference business slowly over the years. We're now doing 4 conferences this year. We did New York in February, Las Vegas now, Indianapolis at the NABRAV radio show coming up in September. And as you heard, we're going to do London in November. So we'd love to have you at any of those. One reason we kind of know what's happening in the world of webcasting is we see it firsthand. We've got our own internet radio property. It's 975 personalizable channels of music aimed at a 35 to 64 demographic. And we've just recently rebranded or remarketed it a little bit to be a workday product, which is going okay. And I hope that's not getting in any of your ways. My shtick in these speeches is to fill them full of 60s pop culture references. In the past, we've done Man from U.N.C.L.E., and we've done a lot of Star Trek, and one of these days, The Avengers, and we did Time Tunnel last year. This time, it's The Prisoner, a great 1967 TV show. How many of you are familiar with it? Gauge the age of the room. About, excellent show, don't you think? About a secret agent who woke up one day to find himself in a mysterious small village where they were trying to find out information, and he was trying to rebel. And the reason I'm using The Prisoner as this theme this year is because he was assigned the number 6, and I have 6 points I want to make in the next 25 minutes. Ha, you get it? Let's see here. To save a little bit of time, here's the agenda, and I won't go through it. But we'll go through it one at a time. So here we go. First, we look each time at Rain Summits at how listening patterns are changing. They are changing in the way consumers use radio. Just as there was a shift 40 years ago from AM toward FM, there's now a similar shift going in the direction of the internet. We've got several pieces of data on this. One is from Nielsen Audio. They just released recently their first in a series of annual reports called Audio Today that track radio's, the scale here is average quarter-hour rating for radio. AM, FM radio, the blue line is Monday through Friday. The gold line is Saturday and Sunday. And that says that at the average moment right now, or in the middle of the day on a weekday, about 12% of Americans are listening to AM, FM radio. And that's down a little bit from the past, as we'll see in a moment. From a study conducted every year formerly by Arbitron and Edison Research, and this year by Triton and Edison Research. It's a study called the Infinite Dial that's been tracking things including past week cumed internet radio for the last decade and a half. And as you can see, it's really been taking off in the last few years. Past week listening to online radio is up to more than a third of the US population and has grown 212% of where it was just 5 years ago. The people who are listening are also listening longer. You can see from this chart that the number of hours that an average internet radio listener says they spend listening to internet radio is up at 200% of what it was 5 years ago. And these numbers are multiplicatable together. So that in fact, if the cume is up 212% of what it was and time spent listening is up, then in fact hours of usage for the medium are up almost 500%. Now this is the value of compound interest. It's a 35% increase each year for 5 years, and you get this kind of increase. So we can plot these two trends. The top line is charting Arbitron's radar reports of annual radar Radio Today study of hours per capita that people have been listening to AM/FM radio since 1999. So that's been declining a little bit each year. Where you see the coral circle, that was not a change in listening. That was just the transition to people meters. So kind of just that was methodology, not actual behavior. And then the green line is the infinite dial study. That's self-reported data from consumers about how much they listen to the medium. And self-reported data can be exaggerated. But if you plot these two trends, you'll see they cross in just a few years. Maybe for we've seen in the Nielsen audio study that trend seems to be continuing. We see in the latest infinite dial study that trend seems to be consistent. Maybe for a bottom line we should switch to another data source and use the Triton Digital's product of Webcast Metrics, charts the audiences of the top 20 webcasters, and maybe that's a more realistic gauge of audience, but still they cross sometime this decade, it looks like. Well, there's looking within webcasting, within Online's radio audience, we can see some interesting trends as well. This is now charting the Webcast Metrics monthly press release for the last four and a half years. And you can see the red line here is people listening to AM/FM streams of the top 5 U.S. broadcasters. So that's streams owned of the stations owned by Clear Channel, CBS, Cumulus, Entercom, and I think it's Cox. And you can see its growth, but it's modest. What has taken off is Pandora, clearly, and then other forms of personalizable radio have also had gains during the period. If you look at this, it's kind of interesting in that listening to streams of AM/FM stations seem like they peaked last April and have been on a slight decline since then. Now they did, in the most recent month, that line did go up again, but this is more evidence that what consumers are looking for on the internet is a product specifically designed for the internet, and I'll come back to that thought in a moment. Now, when you look at all this chart, I'm sorry if I could go back one, thank you. If you look at the last year, that doesn't seem to be the 35% growth that Infinite Dial found. Well, there's a kind of one thing we don't know is there's some webcasters that either aren't in the top 20 of Webcast Metrics, or they aren't clients, or they are clients, but they haven't released their ratings to be in the monthly press release. So you've heard of the dark internet. This is kind of like dark internet radio. We really don't know what these guys are doing, and that might account for the difference. So that's topic number 1. Topic number 2 is that in online radio, and in fact in AM/FM radio too, monetization per listener hour is improving. When we looked at this a year or two ago, I think this was 2 years ago, AM/FM seems to be monetizing its audience at about 6.6 cents per listener hour. This is taking radio industry revenues divided by the number of hours of listening there are in America. For online radio, the best source is Pandora. They're the 500-pound, what you want to call it, gorilla, elephant, whatever. They'll do about the neat thing was previously mentioned on an earlier panel, is we can learn lots about them because they're a public company and they publish on a quarterly basis all sorts of detailed financials about themselves that you can study and learn from. And we can learn from that a couple of years ago, they were monetizing their web audience at about 5.4 cents per listener hour, but were having trouble monetizing their mobile audience. That was, I think, even less than they were paying per hour for royalties. However, we learn in the last year or two that's gotten better. And I believe someone from Pandora will be on a revenues panel this afternoon and can talk about this further. But now, AM/FM's up because revenues are stable, and if hours per capita is decreasing a little bit, that means monetization per hour is getting better. And Pandora has improved their web audience a little bit to 5.5 cents per hour and is they've almost grown 50% on their mobile side. If you average them, because their audience is heavily mobile, they're up almost, in the last year or two, almost 30% in that. And I assume other webcasters presumably are seeing parallel growth. I believe that, from what I've heard anecdotally, that's the case. There's a lot of things that advertisers like about online radio, and if you are selling online radio, these are the points you may want to stress. At least in pure play radio, they like the short stop sets. That gives their spots more attention. They like synchronized visuals, the fact that they can have a banner ad synchronized with the spot. They like creative types of ad units, as we talked about earlier. And they like precise targeting, the fact that you can, particularly if a webcaster has registered listeners, an advertiser can pick precisely who they want to send their message to, and precisely by age and gender and geographic area. So I wanted to address the question, as I kind of do every year at the spring and fall shows, about best opportunities for AM/FM station owners who want to take advantage of this shift in listening behavior. And to do that, I want to try a metaphor. And imagine going back in time to the early to mid-'70s when we were watching Mission Impossible or Search or the Bionic Woman, and when we had our presentations using overhead projectors, which I'm going to now simulate. Wait for the bulb to warm up here. So imagine you're a radio station owner in approximately 1975, and you see this data, and think about what would you do if you saw this data. Fair metaphor? So let me put up the first transparency here. You young people don't even know what I'm talking about, but there were, you typed something and then you put it in a Xerox machine and you put clear film in and it put it on there. So, some trends in broadcast listening and some questions about what we should do. So let me take that one off and put on the next one. So let's say you saw this. You saw, a year or two ago, the two leading stations in the market were AM music stations. Then there were a couple of AM talk stations, and then there were 3 FM music stations. And the ratings trend recently, we can do overlays of these transparencies, looks like this. And you see AM music stations going down really significantly, AM talk stations stable, and FM music stations growing significantly. Well, what should you do? Let's say you have 3 options. You can, A, start a PR campaign to encourage consumers to only buy AM-only radios. Yeah, which they did, some did. B, you could try putting those music formats that are working on FM, like AOR and Beautiful Music, on your AM stations. Okay, some people did that. Or you could acquire an FM station. Well, the logical thing, I think, if we look back, the right thing to do was to acquire an FM station, either to buy one or get a construction permit and build one from scratch. But somehow you saw consumers moving to FM and you said, I'm going to call FM radio. I want to be part of that game. So you got an FM somehow. And then what did you do with it? Let's see. So programming strategies. Or if you have an FM station, here's some data that you might be looking at. There's 2 things you could do. You could simulcast your AM station, and that's what, when I was a kid, a couple of Milwaukee AM stations were doing on FM. Or, on the right-hand side, you could put on programming that was designed for FM. That it was things that weren't available on the FM band, that took advantage of the higher fidelity and the stereo, that had a different strategy when it came to spot breaks. And let's overlay growth. And if you saw this, what would you think was the thing to do? Well, the thing to do would be to take your FM and put on, not simulcast, but develop original programming that fit the medium. And then, I'm sorry, this is a kind of a leftover slide, but that I think was a logical thing to do, and I hope you can see the parallels, which are, there were 2 options. You could continue simulcasts, or you could flip to a format that makes sense specifically for FM, and that's, in retrospect, the thing you should have done. You should have flipped to a format that made sense for the medium. So let's move back to the present. And I know it's the future, but let's say it's my graphic for the present. And there are a lot of people doing that step of designing radio programming for the internet that takes advantage of the interactivity and the visuals and all the depth of possible channels and all the things that the internet can offer. And they are building billions of dollars of value in doing that. There's a great book, I think I've mentioned it at a couple of previous summits, called Value Migration by, I believe it's a Harvard Business School professor whose name I can't pronounce. Slavatsky, I think, correct? And at any rate, he argues, this is a great book, and it's out of print, but you can often find it on Amazon, and I'd urge you to look at it. I'll show you the cover again in a sec. But his argument is when two things happen, when customer priorities change, and companies come up with a new business model, a different way of making money, you need both of those things to happen at the same time, and when that happens, companies build billions of dollars in new value. A great example of that is from the department store industry. Some other examples I'll talk about for a second are from the coffee world, and then we'll look at it from a radio point of view for a second. So here's the book again. The subtitle is How to Think Several Moves Ahead of the Competition. It's kind of treating business like chess. And again, that has to happen at the same time as this, and that's what creates big value. So let's look at it in the world, for example, of coffee. Back in the past, 20, 30 years ago, customer priorities were like cheapness and, cheapness, uniformity, easy to buy it at the grocery store. And you had brands like this. But then consumer priorities change over time. And nowadays, or at least by 1990, those tastes had changed. People cared more about quality and style and freshness and a nice atmosphere and being close to their office. They were being influenced by Starbucks, cafes opening up everywhere, et cetera. The old coffee companies had a business model that had one way of making money, involving keeping the product costs low and using coupons. But then when this came along, this company rode on changes in consumer taste and had a different business model, where they used expensive beans and charged a lot and built the brand a different way and sold high-margin items. And by doing so, these brands were worth a couple of billion. Starbucks built a brand worth $60 billion. Because, so a lot of value migrated from the old legacy coffee brands to Starbucks. Changing customer priorities, combined with a different way of making money, created $60 billion of value for Starbucks. In the world of retailing, it's kind of similar. Back in the old days, it was department stores like this. And customer priorities they cared about style and service in a central location. But then as the discounters appeared on the scenes, people like Walmart and Kmart and Woolco and Target, and, Venture and Kohl's, interestingly, almost all these brands debuted in 1967, I think it was. They all debuted the same year, interestingly. But consumer priorities changed. They liked those stores. They liked that approach. So instead of caring about those things, they started caring about things like selection and convenience and low price. Well, the department stores had one way of making money, and the discounters had a different way of making money. And so what you had was, as we said, it was changing customer priorities, caring less about style and more about price, combined with a different way of making money, and those discounters created billions in new value. The department store chains had been worth maybe a few $1 billion at most each. Walmart, now worth $240 billion. Target, worth more than almost all traditional department stores combined. And even Kohl's, I think, bigger, maybe twice as big as any current department store chain. So finally and thirdly, certainly finally, let's look at it from radio. We have a lot of companies worth multi-billion-dollar valuations about a decade ago. And a decade or two ago, these were the things people cared about on radio. Popular genres, hit songs, friendly disc jockeys, service elements. But in 2014, tastes are changing. People are more interested in variety of genres and having less music repetition, and they care more about low spot load, and they care more about personalization. And so we've got changing customer priorities, and we've got a different business model. This is kind of the FCC license-based business model. But then Sirius came along with a totally different one, where primarily it was billions of dollars of satellites to get started, and then having people primarily pay a subscription rather than primarily making their money off advertising. So you have changing tastes, different business model, billions of dollars of value created. Pandora and other forms of pure play online radio have the same thing. It's a different business model that when combined with a different way of making money, combined with a change in customer tastes, builds billions of dollars. So you have Sirius at the moment, a $25 billion company, which is bigger than almost, that's bigger than almost all the broadcasters on the right except Clear Channel combined. And then you have Pandora, in the last year, has grown from 2 billion valuation to 7 billion valuation. So you see value, and then the valuations on the right, if you check stock prices, have declined a little bit. So you see value migration in our industry as well. You have changing consumer tastes, priorities, you have a new business model, and you have billions of dollars of new value created. Well, the neat thing about this is you may, depending on your point of view, you may see this as negative and or threatening, but I'd like to encourage you to see it as opportunity. Because if you're in the room working for a pure play already, then you're in the space now. But if you're working for an AM/FM broadcaster, you can compete in this space as well. And it can be done. These department stores, many of them tried doing a discount operation. They saw Walmart, et cetera, taking off, and they decided to compete. But in fact, there's my graphic, sorry. Of these, only Dayton succeeded. Dayton built Target. And the way they did this was, according to either that book or a book I've quoted before, The Innovator's Dilemma / The Innovator's Solution, you set up an autonomous business unit. You try and set it away from, if you're an AM/FM broadcaster, you set up an organization outside of corporate headquarters and outside of your stations. You have a different overhead structure. Then that company, that division, doesn't ride along on the parent overhead structure. It creates its own. It gets its own sales force, and you ask it to show profitability quickly. And that's what Dayton's did right that many of the other chains did wrong. They didn't do these steps. And that's why, as I said, Target ended up a $40 billion company, even when all these companies combined are worth 15 roughly right now. So it was value migrating. In conclusion, and in fact, I think we will even have a second for questions if you like, or comments. We're in a world where consumer priorities are changing, where you can see big opportunity growing in terms of a shift to listening to radio online. You see great things to pitch to advertisers. It is an exciting world that we're heading into, and it is great to be part of it with you. And I look forward to pursuing this path together. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the rest of our afternoon together. Thank you.